The second reason is that
Subra Krishnan and Harihara, I am really sorry to interrupt you, but we are going to hear from Andy Burnham. I'm sure you'll want to hear this too.
Okay, thank you everybody. Thanks for coming. If I could just introduce who is standing behind me. Sir Richard Leese, Leader of Manchester City Council. Mayor Paul Dennett, City Mayor of Salford. Councillor Eamonn O'Brien, Leader of Bury Council. Councillor Sean Fielding, Leader of Oldham Council. Councillor Elise Wilson, Leader of Stockport Council. So I'm really grateful to them all for joining me this afternoon, and it reflects the unity that we have had here in Greater Manchester amongst our 10 councils, but also amongst our members of Parliament as well. People here in Greater Manchester have been living under restrictions for 3 months, and they have taken a heavy toll on people. They're struggling, businesses are on the brink of closure. To accept any further restrictions in these circumstances would be certain to increase levels of poverty, homelessness and hardship within our city region. Let's be clear who is most affected by a Tier 3 lockdown. It is people working in pubs, in bookies, driving taxis, people too often forgotten by those in power. But this city region has never walked on by, and it never will. At the start of these negotiations, together with the leaders of our councils, we made a commitment to all of those people that we would look out for them and stand up for what is right. It cannot be right. It cannot be right to close people's place of work, to shut somebody's business without giving them proper support so that they can look after themselves, their families, through a very challenging winter that lies ahead of us. So we've been clear throughout, we could only accept further restrictions with full financial support. We put forward a costed package of measures, a detailed package of measures, but in particular to support people on the lowest incomes and people who are self-employed. £15 million a month was what we was needed to support people across the 10 boroughs that make up Greater Manchester. These would be people who would need support to top up the furlough to 80%, recognising that people can't live on 2/3 of their wages. People who are self-employed also with 80% of their income so that they could make ends meet. That was the commitment that we made. So this would cost £90 million to the end of the financial year. In negotiations with the government, we were prepared to reduce our request to £75 million, and we even were prepared to go even lower, £65 million as the bare minimum, to prevent a winter of real hardship here. That is what we believe we needed to prevent poverty, to prevent hardship, to prevent homelessness. Those were the figures that we had, not what we wanted, what we needed to prevent all of those things happening. But the government refused to accept this, and at 2 o'clock today, they walked away from negotiations. In summary, at no point today were we offered enough to protect the poorest people in our communities through the punishing reality of the winter to come. Even now, I am still willing to do a deal, but it cannot be on the terms that the government offered today, because on those terms I could not meet the commitments I made to people on the lowest incomes, to people who are self-employed, to the freelancers in this city who need our support. I could not do it on those terms. And I don't think it is right to ask people to go into a lockdown, to accept further changes within their lives without supporting them through all of that and what it entails. It can't be right to do that. How can we carry the public with us through this pandemic if we are forcing them to lose their income, their place of work, without supporting them through that? How is that going to keep people with what's being done here to fight this virus? So finally, I don't believe we can proceed as a country on this basis through the pandemic by grinding communities down through punishing financial negotiations. We are asking a lot of the public at this difficult time, and we need to carry them with us, not crush their spirit. We need national unity, and that is why I now look to Parliament to intervene and make a judgment on a fair financial framework for Tier 3 lockdowns, because make no mistake, this was not just about Greater Manchester. All parts of the country may find themselves in a Tier 3 lockdown at some point this winter. And what we need to be able to say to people living in those areas is that they have a guarantee that they can plan for should they need it, 80% of their wages or their income. That is the least that we owe to those people. The money that businesses will be able to rely on to survive. We should be setting out that fair financial framework. I just want to finish by speaking directly to the people of Greater Manchester, because I know they felt a lot of uncertainty over the last week as these negotiations have played out. We know this is going to be a difficult time for you, but together with the leaders behind me and all of the leaders of Greater Manchester, we took this stand for you. We will carry on fighting for you. We will carry on putting your health first, but health is more than the virus. We will support people's health in the broadest possible sense. So tough days lie ahead. Please, everybody, observe the law at all times and follow the public health advice. Above all else, please look out for each other, as I know you will. Thank you very much.
Well, the Mayor of Greater Manchester there, Andy Burnham, with his description of where the talks went wrong. Let's continue listening in.
And asked us to restrict the freedom of people in Greater Manchester and for lots of businesses to close without being able to give us any evidence that those businesses were particular sources of transmission or that closing them down would stop the transmission of COVID-19 virus. In response to that, a week and a half ago, we submitted, as Andy has said, a comprehensive plan to government which had 3 elements to it. The first element were measures that we believed could curtail the spread of COVID-19. The second measures were measures that would allow us to support the most vulnerable people, the people most at risk of hospitalisation if they do catch the virus, of being able to look after themselves. The third was what Andy's just been talking about, the package of measures to be able to support those people effectively put out of work by the restrictions. That package was costed in its entirety, and that's what we went to government for. In the discussions we've had over the last couple of days, we thought twice that they were going to meet us in being able to support that package. Twice, when it's got to the end of the day, they have let us down and they are letting the people of Manchester down. And can I say, at this moment, although we have put forward a fully costed package of measures, we as yet do not have one jot from government in writing saying what it is that they propose to us. Nothing in writing yet from government. That is not a way to work with us. That's not a way to help us support the people of Greater Manchester. It's not a way to deal effectively with this virus. Thank you. Well, as we stand here, yes, but even the money we were talking about, we still have no idea what conditions government would attach to that money. No idea.
So we've been negotiating with government since the 9th of this month. 11 days we've been having detailed conversations with the government. We've also been doing our homework, actually taking an evidence-based approach to these negotiations. We know here in Greater Manchester, since Tier 1, Tier 2, that 408,000 people have actually accessed the furlough arrangements in Greater Manchester. We also know that unemployment, has doubled between March and May. Going into these negotiations, we already know Greater Manchester is in a precarious situation. So we are absolutely 100% behind the work that the combined authority has done to do the evidence-based homework to properly understand what we need to support jobs and businesses here in Greater Manchester. And as Richard and Andy have already said, we've put all of this to government over the last few days, and what's not come back is a reasoned, evidence-based approach on behalf of government. Government are entering into multi-million-pound contracts at a national level, but they can't find an extra £15 million for the people of Greater Manchester. This is the situation we find ourselves in today. We have gone into these negotiations in good faith. We've taken an evidence-based approach to this. We've done our homework. We fought hard for the people of Greater Manchester, and it's really disappointing today that the government can't back the negotiations that Greater Manchester has put forward, the homework we've done, the evidence we've put forward to support workers, to support children and families within our city region. This has always been about people. This has never been about politics for us, and it's really sad today that the government haven't accepted our reasoned, logical and evidence-based approach. But we are where we are, and we will continue to fight. The door continues to be open in terms of negotiations with government, and we will continue to make that case, that evidenced, reason-based case for the people of Greater Manchester. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's probably been said, hasn't it? But to say that I agree with my colleagues really on this, we've put an immense amount of work to make sure that what we were proposing, that we weren't coming empty-handed, that we were coming in good faith, that we'd done the evidence, we'd looked at it and we'd put something together and we've gone, we're bringing you something that we think is actually going to make a difference. And at the same time, consider people in their entirety, in their whole. Their health is more than just one thing, it's more than just COVID, and we have to think about that together as one thing. And what we know here is that in Greater Manchester we've had restrictions on and off in various degrees across the city region that's really affected how people have been able to live their lives, and to not be able to be with each other, knowing that some of us have been really poorly, being really worried about other people, we've lost loved ones, we're going through stress and difficulty, we don't know if our job's going to be here, and it's been a big ask of people to go into Tier 3 and really limit that even further for quite a long period of time is a huge ask. And so for me, it's always been around what can we do that's going to be the right thing for people here, and thinking of them as a whole person. At the end of the day, there's a massive amount of uncertainty, isn't there now? And like Paul said, we went into this in good faith. This was about actually how can we get the best thing for Greater Manchester, and all we've seen is that the government doesn't care really. They've kind of turned their backs a little bit on us, and they're not really interested in that. They had their set agenda, and to me that's what it feels like, that they had their agenda and that's what they were sticking to.
Should they now expect those further restrictions to be enforced?
Well, we are led to believe that the government will be imposing Tier 3. We don't know. We don't know the statement that the government is about to make, but they walked away, as I said, from negotiations. We all said it. We were prepared to carry on talking. It wasn't about what we wanted, it was what we needed. what we needed to protect our public from poverty over what will be a punishing winter. And that was what this was all about. And I think the government needs to reflect. If you are to ask people to go into a situation where places of work are closed down across the 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester, that is a big thing. You are asking people to do a big thing. And you can't do that without fully supporting them through that and doing it on the cheap. But that is what it seemed to me they were trying to do. The whatever it takes moment of earlier this year has completely gone. It's you'll get what we'll give you. And that isn't acceptable in the middle of a national crisis like a pandemic.
So it's probably now coming. Will there be any additional money for people in this region with your talks on broken down?
Well, the government tabled £60 million. Because I said to you it wasn't enough to protect people from real hardship. I costed it at £15 million a month. And to the end of the financial year, we thought that was going to need to be 90, but we brought that down in negotiations. I could not make it work on what the government was offering. And that was why the negotiations fell back. But if the government put 60 million on the table, I mean, surely, if they're taking that off again, is this a game of poker? Are they playing poker with places and people's lives through a pandemic? Is that what this is about? Are they piling pressure on people to accept the lowest figure that they can get away with? Is that what this is about? Is that how they're running this country? Is this a government committed to levelling up this country? That's what they told people in this city, the people who drive those taxis, who work in the pubs, many of them who may have voted for them. They said to them they would level up. What we've seen today is a deliberate act of levelling down. At the end of the day, Roger, as Paul Dennett said, it's about people, doing what's right for people. And when I stood in St. Peter's Square last week, I said we would commit to fighting for an 80% furlough for people who are now facing being on 2/3 of their wages as of in the next few days. So this is real now. This isn't kind of hypothetical. This is reality now for thousands of people in Greater Manchester. We said to people who are self-employed and low paid that we would work to get 80% of their income. How could I sign up to a deal that wouldn't provide for that level of support? But I think that's the basic level of support that people need.
And what would you say from a
Do you want to come in, Richard?
Anybody who loses a family member through COVID, and people made this point after North West last night, who lose a family member because of the delay bringing in these restrictions, what would you say to that?
Well, I'll bring Richard in a second. I think health is about more than controlling the virus. What I would say to anybody who loses anyone from COVID is that is a complete tragedy, and we've been working all year hard to put people's health first. We went into restrictions at the request of the government to protect people here, and we've been in those restrictions for 3 months. We've done everything that's been asked of us, but when we ask of government to help us, it doesn't seem that help is coming back the other way. Protecting people's health now is a very big challenge throughout this crisis. And while we will continue to do whatever we can to support families in that position, I'll be honest, I have doubts about whether closing the places they want to close will do enough to bring the figures down. As part of this discussion, we were told by experts, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, and we also heard the Chief Scientific Advisor say the same thing, that they don't think the Tier 3 proposal, as it's currently configured, is going to do enough to bring the cases down. So we were saying to the government, why are you asking us to do something that may not achieve the results that you want? And that was what we were facing, pain without the results. And I don't believe the government has yet put forward a proposal to make its Tier 3 plans work. If you're going to do it, fully fund it, and they are not doing that.
Can I just a couple of points on that, and it's a specific question. What will we say to people? First of all, as Andy has said, is that there has been no evidence that what was proposed by government would work. And that's what our experts say, and it's what their experts say. We put forward proposals that would work, and let's compare a government that's prepared to spend billions on test and trace contracts that don't work, but won't spend £15 million a month on the health of people of Greater Manchester. That's a contrast I think we will be making.
Absolutely right, Richard. Yeah.
Andy, having spent the last week...
Ross, could you manage the questions for me? Is that okay?
We have a line of journalists here who are going to come forward, Andy, one at a time, trying to be socially distant.
Keep your distance, everybody. Yeah.
We've spoken to taxi drivers today who already can't pay their bills. You've just said you've walked away from the 60 million government offered. If the people of Greater Manchester end up with less money than that, will you accept that you as well will pay it?
Well, all I can say is I've fought with everything I've got, really, for people on the lowest incomes in this city region. Like Richard said, in the end, it came down to a small amount of money, but that small amount of money is not easy for us to find, given the pressure we've got on our budgets, but it's much easier for the government to find, but they weren't prepared. We needed to have enough to protect people, and what the government was offering was not enough. It was a take it or leave it. But is the government now saying they're going to take that off the table? Because that suggests to me that this isn't being done on what people need, that the places will need when they go into Tier 3. Has the government assessed what people will need? Have they actually worked out what Tier 3 will do to some of our poorest communities? Have they worked out how many people will be way below the poverty line? Have they worked out what it will do for numbers of people sleeping rough? I don't believe they've done that. They are just coming up with a figure that works for them, rather than the real cost of supporting people through a Tier 3 lockdown. And basically, I think this fight is not over. This fight now goes to Parliament. And I am saying again to all of the leaders of the main parties in Westminster, I am looking to you to intervene and make a judgment on what is a fair level of support for areas that are asked to close down large parts of their economy. What is fair in those circumstances, based on the need that there will be there? So I think it would be an act of very poor faith if the government took that 60 million off the table. I think it should still be there, but I think the debate should carry on about what does Greater Manchester truly need to take us through this challenge that we are in.
Second question. We've spoken a lot about the finances. How much has actually been talked about what these restrictions will actually be? What will people in Greater Manchester not be able to do, and when will that come in? Has that even been discussed?
Well, they were part of the discussions, and I guess the government will set out its decision later today, but they walked away from the negotiations, so I can't say to you now what the government is planning to do, because they've taken a unilateral path rather than working with us on this. And I find that wrong in the circumstances, given that people's lives here are about to change. I think a government should always have the support of Parliament if it's to do what it's about to do. And that's why I call on Parliament to intervene in this situation now.
Salford, Sky News. Andy Burnham, these negotiations cost over just £5 million. After 11 days of negotiation, what can you tell the people of Greater Manchester who actually want to win this negotiation? Because it seems like you're not sure whether you've got the cash, you don't seem to have the control, you're not sure what role you have going forward.
So what I would say to them is, yes, it's a surprise, isn't it, that the government was not prepared to look at a costed plan that Sir Richard Leese mentioned before. This wasn't a figure we'd plucked out of the air. This is what we had kind of looked at in detail as to the number of people who would be out of work because their workplace was closed, or on a furlough, a 2/3 furlough, the number of people who would be self-employed but without any work because of the effect of closing pubs on taxis and on door security and other industries. It wasn't what we wanted, Sam, it was what we needed to help people. And that is what we were arguing for, and it's what we will continue to argue for. And that's why I say to them, the fight isn't over, because I think Parliament does now have to make a judgment on this. Can we see this happen time and time again now, where areas are kind of lined up and almost bullied to accept whatever the government will offer?
You don't have any mechanism, if you're not going to win a vote in Parliament, if you don't have the parliamentary numbers on your side, in the end, you're raising a grievance rather than coming up with a solution. Is it better to be in a no-deal scenario than a compromise?
Well, I thought it was a point of principle that I would not accept 2/3 wages for the lowest paid in this city region. Why should I accept that? Why should I accept that the self-employed just get forgotten and freelancers just get forgotten? There is points of principle here that actually we should stand up for the people who often get forgotten by politicians, and that is what we were doing. And you say there's no support. Well, we did have the support of many Conservative MPs here in Greater Manchester, and I don't know whether you're right, whether or not there are the parliamentary numbers, but I live in hope that there are people in Parliament who still believe that we should act on principle and not allow some people to get 4/5 of their wages, and when it comes to the lowest paid workers in society, well, they only get 2/3 because actually no one speaks up for them, so we can just do what we like. Well, they can't do what they like. Some things are a fight of principle. That is the stand that we have taken here. It's the stand we will continue to take. It cannot be right to put people in a lockdown on 2/3 of their wages when they are the lowest paid.
Andy, do you think that the delay in not even getting a deal, but the delay in getting to this point might have caused more infections and therefore could possibly cost lives? And also, what do you say to people who hear you talking and think, Andy Burnham says we shouldn't be going into this like this. Andy Burnham says I can't afford to live on 2/3 of my salary, therefore I'm just going to go out and go to work and not follow these restrictions.
Well, what I would say is point again to what Sir Richard said. We did not have the evidence that the hospitality industry in this city was responsible for a large number of infections. That is not the evidence that we have got. And actually, I would put it to you that the 10 p.m. curfew is counterproductive, that when you close more regulated environments, you create more opportunity for the virus to spread. And I don't think the government has produced the evidence either to show that virus is spreading in hospitality venues or indeed that the curfew isn't making matters worse. So that is what I would say in response to what you've argued. The government, if it's going to back Tier 3, it needs to listen to the Chief Medical Officer. He was saying you have to fully fund more places to close. And what they are doing is they are not doing that. They are doing the minimum, as you've seen today, putting the minimum level of funding forward. How is that going to make this regional lockdown strategy work?
What about those people who've heard what you have to say and think, well, Andy Burnham doesn't support restrictions?
But I'm not the government of the country. I am elected by the people of Greater Manchester to speak for them alongside the 10 leaders of Greater Manchester. That is our job, and it's our job to get what we think is needed for this city region. As I said, we've worked with the government. Why were they not prepared to work with us? You know, in a pandemic, surely the approach should be to err on the side of providing more for people and communities, not less, surely? You know, this is the situation that we are in. You don't help the health of the nation by kind of chipping away at all of the funding you're going to give people. Of course, you do it by doing the opposite, by erring on the side of caution during a pandemic and giving people what they need. And we made that argument. I can't make the government listen, but I believe passionately what we said was right, and I would do it again, and I will do it every day until we believe we get fairness for all of those areas that are now facing restrictions.
What I'm trying to get at is, are you telling people they should follow the rules?
I said that. I said that very directly at the end. Please observe the law. I've said it, Sir Richard has said it, all of the leaders would say it. Please follow the public health advice. Please look out for each other. I think in the situation that we're now in, we know what people here are like. They will rally round and they will support each other. But obviously that's what we're now asking them to do, given that the government has walked away from us.
Andy Burnham, you were saying that you were pressing for a very large sum of money from central government, 90 million, so that the lowest paid workers in Greater Manchester will have a significant level of support in Tier 3. But you're now acknowledging that this has fallen apart over a relatively small sum of £5 million, which you've said it's a relatively small sum. If you're allowing this, the whole pack of cards to fall apart over such a small amount of money, does that not suggest that your aim in all of this has been to showboat ahead of next May's elections and not to be putting the interests of those lowest paid workers first?
Nick, what I would say is there is a major point of principle at stake here. what is fair treatment for the lowest paid in our society? Is 2/3 of their wages fair when their workplace is closed? Is that fair? I would imagine that most people can, myself included, in more middle income jobs can live on 2/3 of our wages. But how many people understand what it would be like to live on 2/3 of your wages if you are currently on the minimum wage? What do you think is going through their minds tonight? Those people who know they can't pay 2/3 of their rent or their bills. That is what is at stake here, Nick. And you say it's a small amount of money. Well, it's a small amount of money to the government maybe, but it's not a small amount of money to people here, to the public authorities here. You ask all of these councils behind me how much they are short of in their budgets as a result of what has happened this year and the lack of commitments that they've had from the government. It's not a small amount of money to people here. We're struggling to run the trams. We're struggling to support people off the streets. We've got people donating to help our efforts to give people a bed for every night in this city region. We are struggling to make this work. This pandemic has hit the north of England harder than it has other places because of the entrenched poverty that there is in the north of England, because Westminster has neglected the north of England for so many years. So you say it's a small amount of money. For the government, maybe, but not for us. And listen to what Sir Richard said. It's interesting what the government has found money for during this pandemic, and it's interesting what they have not found money for. Today, they have not been prepared to find money for the lowest paid in our city region, for the self-employed. And I think people will take note of that and draw their own conclusions.
Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, there with his reaction after talks with the government on agreeing a financial package for entering Tier 3 restrictions failed today. Mr Burnham said he had presented a detailed package of measures fully costed to the government to support people on the lowest incomes, those who are self-employed. He had calculated it would require £15 million a month to top up furlough to 80% of their income. That was a total of £90 million to the end of the financial year. In negotiations, Mr Burnham said they were prepared to reduce to £75 million and then today even lower to £65 million, but the government refused to accept this. And at 2 p.m. today, he said the government walked away from negotiations. He called on Parliament to intervene to ensure a fair and financial framework. This is not just about Manchester, this is for all regions going into Tier 3. Sir Richard Leese, the leader of Manchester City Council, made a contrast between the amount of money the government was prepared to spend, billions on test and trace that doesn't work, he said, but they won't spend £15 million a month supporting people in our poorest communities, the lowest paid. In the end, Andy Burnham said it came down to a small amount of money, but not easy for us to find. This is a matter of principle about standing up for the lowest paid. That is a stand we have taken. He did, though, ask people in Greater Manchester to observe the law at all times, follow the public health advice and look out for each other. While Mr Burnham was speaking, we also got the latest data on coronavirus for the UK.